Can thinking like the director of a movie help us with developing digital projects? So I get that this is like a weird question, and it's probably not something that a lot of people are wondering about. And if you already work in a digital creative space, you probably won't be worrying about project development because there's all sorts of things like semi-religions dedicated to project management, whether that's Agile or Scrum or Prince2. You can take your pick and have an almost step-by-step guide on how to manage and develop your ideas into prototypes and projects. But recently, I had an experience where a student asked me, what should I include in a prototype for my digital project? And to be honest, I was actually kind of stumped. In my mind, which is totally corrupted by Agile and Scrum influence software development type thinking, a prototype is obviously just the first iteration of your project that realizes just enough of your core ideas and maybe builds on the imagined experience that you want for your users. And it works, just well enough for you to compare it usefully to the next prototypes that you might make, and to serve as a building block on which you can test the rest of your design. But I could tell, looking into my students' eyes, maybe it was over Teams, I can't remember, that none of this was going to make any sense to them. So I scrambled around for something that we could use to kind of talk as a shared language, and maybe use as an example of a basic prototype or steps to making a prototype. And it turned out that we were both massive film fans, which then got me thinking, not everyone is going to understand Agile influenced software development, sprints, Scrum Masters, Gantt charts, metrics. These things take time to understand and to implement. And if you're a single creator working on your own, and maybe for the first time, you need something that's easy to grasp and fast. So I think this is particularly relevant in the contemporary workplace and classroom, where young people are expected to create digital projects. There's this maybe unfair expectation that because you grew up with computers, you must know how to use them. Why should we ask them to write a monthly finance report or some sort of boring essay when they'd be much happier tooting a snap talk?
Slide that into your DMs and Twitch it.
In UK universities in particular, this new idea of creative practice or practice as research is making waves through the humanities and social sciences as educators try desperately to create educational pathways that will prepare students for life outside of the ivory tower. And, that's great. But for students attempting practice-based or creative projects for the first time, it can be really difficult just to know how to start. There's also the additional strain that can come from learning a new piece of hardware or software, and maybe even learning to do some basic programming. That means you might feel out of your depth before you've even begun. I think that by drawing on a creative form that most people can at least conceptualize, something that doesn't involve coding or programming or knowing how to use some complex piece of software, like filmmaking, we can develop 3 easy steps for creating a basic prototype, or at the very least some kind of plan for any digital project. I think that by thinking like an old school movie director, clapperboard in hand, that can help you to complete a project in today's busy digital economy. I'm going to focus on 3 things that filmmakers use when planning and prototyping their productions: mood boards, storyboards, and shot sequences. I'm going to move from the most general to the most specific, and as I go through them, I'm also going to make links to some techniques that are used in other fields and talk about how we might use these when making other sorts of digital projects, whether that's in school or in the workplace. Hopefully, by the end of this, you'll either want to try approaching your next project like a filmmaker, or you'll have discovered some kind of equivalent more suited to your skills that you'll want to look up further. Either way, let's get started. The first and most basic thing any digital creator can take from the filmmaking process and try to integrate into their creation is the humble mood board. Chances are, if you've worked in digital content creation, you've already made a mood board in the past. But if you haven't, a mood board is a collection of things, Whether that's still images from films, famous paintings, snippets of poetry, leaves, twigs, anything that makes you think about your final project you have in mind. Mood boards are an incredibly effective tool for creatives as they allow us to think about what inspires us in a visual and intuitive way. The process of making mood boards should be fun and creative, like childhood scrapbook making, but it's important to remember you're not just bringing together images and other media that you like. There's a clear objective here. You should be trying to use the mood board to narrow down some of the choices you might make for a project. One thing a mood board can easily help us to do is form a guiding colour palette for a project. This means a selection of 3 to 5 colours or hues of colour that you can try to gravitate towards in your work. Sticking to this palette will give your work a cohesive feel. Creating a palette from your mood board using today's advanced editing software is easy. We can pull together images in any raster-based image editing program, preferably not Photoshop, but that's another story. Posterize those images down to 3 to 5 colours, and then use the dropper tool to pick some of those colours that you're drawn to. You might try to pick 2 dominant colours for your project taken from opposite sides of the colour wheel. Teal and orange are popular choices, as well as a neutral colour. These can then be used to help inform what locations you film in or how you colour grade your footage. If we look at an existing film, it's possible for us to think of a mood board that could have inspired it. With Christmas just around the corner, let's use a sequence from Die Hard from 1988. The story of one beleaguered husband attempting to save his wife from the hands of a crack team of murderous terrorists. We can imagine the mood board that would have served to inspire a film like Die Hard. On the one hand, we have John McClane, who embodies the drab, washed-out colours of the cop dramas and army shows of the 1960s and 70s. He's the salt of the earth, and so he serves as the inspiration for our neutral tones. By comparison, John is juxtaposed against the more high-contrast suits of Hans Gruber and his men, as well as the neon lights of the Nakatomi Plaza. The power suits of the 1980s and the skyscrapers of Los Angeles provide us with all the colours we need. The role of these intentional colour choices become particularly apparent when Hans and John are brought together at the end of the movie. In the film, darkness is shaded to be browns and navies, similar to John's colour palette, rather than pure black. By comparison, Hans's suit appears nearly black, making him seem like an unnatural presence in John's world. In a scene at the end of the film, where Hans stands against the night sky, the colour grading of the footage makes Hans appear darker than the night itself. The outcomes of mood boards don't have to be limited to the colours of films. We could make a mood board dedicated to movements in games or user experiences from websites. What's important is how they can come together to act as a diary for our research and a source of inspiration. What's more, mood boards are a great way to think about what you want the audience to see from your final product and why. This is a great first step towards something a little more advanced, like the user story from the Scrum implementation of Agile thinking. Now, that's another topic for another time, but some of the ideas that you can develop from mood boards will easily transfer to that technique too. No matter what you're planning to create, whether it's a short film, a social media photo shoot, or an innovative website, making a mood board can help keep your creative vision in place. If you want to think more about mood boards in the humanities, check out this article by Tracy Cassidy, who discusses how mood boards can be used in qualitative research.
Mood boards are a great tool for thinking about the basic elements that inspire your project. They help us to consider the colours and thematic elements that are the driving force behind what we want to create. What if we want to go deeper and we want to plan with more clarity? What if we want to start outlining exactly what people will see from our games, our websites, or whatever it is we're planning to build? Well, if we know who the intended audience or customer is, one option we can explore is what's called the MVP, or minimum viable product.
A common example of MVPs is this. Let's say we wanted to make the next big leap in transportation. Well, we can't just zap a hover car out of thin air. Our MVP is probably going to have to be some sort of bicycle. It's not fast, it's not new, but it's the minimum vehicular method for getting from A to B. Once we have a bicycle up and running, we can start making improvements. In the digital world, if we wanted to make a game for hardcore gamers or a website for savvy dupe shoppers, it's good to have a problem our MVPs can aim to fix. Maybe we feel games aren't difficult enough, or dupe apps are too confusing. Our MVPs would be the simplest possible version of our final product that addresses, in some way, the problem we're trying to solve. Maybe we could make a game that's so hard it can't be beaten. Later, we can try to tweak it to give the player an increasing chance to win until it's too easy, and then we can just pull it back again. An issue with MVPs, however, is that they don't necessarily tell our whole story. They aren't a very clear vision of how you picture your app or your game working. Software engineers try to counter this by using Agile's user journeys, where we imagine certain customer needs to imagine a journey through our app. But these can lead us to losing sight of the big picture. So, how could filmmaking help us to think differently about the MVP of a digital product? Well, a second tool we can repurpose from filmmaking into digital creation is the storyboard. If you don't know, a storyboard is a small collection of usually hand-drawn images that try to communicate the key moments of a scene. A storyboard is a great way to pre-visualize a scene you want to film, as it can help you think about what your key shots are going to look like, where the camera will need to be, and where you might direct your actors. Going back to our sequence with John McClane confronting Hans, we could imagine a short storyboard that covers the main elements of the scene. We could begin with John entering, carrying a gun in a wide establishing shot. Hans holds Holly at gunpoint, tells John to drop his weapon. John obliges. Hans tells John he's going to shoot him and says John's catchphrase. John begins to laugh. Hans laughs back. In that moment, John uses Hans' dropped guard to shoot him and his crony. Hans falls to his doom out the window. Although this storyboard misses so much of what makes the scene great, it gets us from A to B, and gives us an idea of all we would need to prepare in order to carry out and complete a shoot like this. If we know, for instance, that we want to see Hans falling from the building, we'll need to put a lot of thought into how we're going to film that. A similar level of thought could go into a game or website. Maybe we want our players or our customers to have a specific experience when using what we build for them. If we can picture it and draw it out first, it can help us not only to pre-visualize what we have in mind, but also help us to start working out the tricky parts that we're going to need to spend a lot more time on. Using storyboards in game design is actually quite common practice, and I recommend checking out these articles on the topic. At the same time, a quick game creation tool like Twine or MIT's Scratch language can help you to imagine the basic underlying logic of your games really quickly. If you're more interested in tools for building websites, then wireframe tools like Balsamiq can be really helpful. Or if you're happy to rent software instead of own it, maybe you could use Adobe XD instead.
So far, we've discussed how you can plan for a digital project at the most basic level. We've thought one level more detailed than that. And I suggested if you're a digital creative, tired of the same old techniques from Scrum and Agile, like user stories, you might consider using a mood board or seeking an inspiration for an MVP. But if you don't want to use a customer journey map, you might consider using a storyboard to plan out how a user sees your game or your website or whatever it is that you want to build. But what can you do if you want to plan things in really meticulous detail?
For software engineers, there are plenty of options for making detailed prototypes. Something like UML, the Unified Modeling Language, can be really helpful for this. UML is not a programming language, but is a standardized way of creating a non-functional blueprint of a project that can be shared with other people. UML is a predominantly visual language, and most often results in a detailed diagram of the functions and capabilities of a proposed project. A UML diagram allows digital creatives to map out just about any use case for a piece of software they want to make at a very high level of detail. However, UML is not without its problems. As unified and detailed as UML is, it doesn't provide visual examples or require specific descriptions. What's more, it doesn't prevent programmers from using jargon or their own made-up terms that can't be understood by others. For digital creators then, detailed modeling languages like UML are a solution for creating prototypes, but not a foolproof solution.
As such, one last time, I want to suggest that thinking like a filmmaker can improve how a digital creative approaches detailed prototyping. This is because a good filmmaker, or good directors of photography at least, will develop what's called a shot list. That removes a lot of the ambiguity that comes from filmmaking, and it leads to a much more effective, much more efficient development schedule.
In contrast to the storyboard that gave us an insight into what a scene is supposed to look like generally, a shot list is a more technical document. Although every filmmaker approaches things a little differently, a shot list will contain a list of each shot in a scene at a level of detail not possible in the storyboard. Each shot will be given a specific number, a brief description, details of the type of shot, whether it's wide angle, a close-up, details of any camera movement, is this a panning shot, a crane shot, handheld, but also details like which lens is to be used, the frame rate the camera is to be set at, the location to be used, or any sounds needed, and so on. While this might sound like detail that could be added to your storyboard, this is a much more technical and practical document that can help you and your team produce content on a given day. For example, let's look at the sequence again from Die Hard. In total, from John entering onto the gangway to Hans falling to his death, there are approximately 50 shots from a variety of different angles, distances, and utilizing a variety of lenses. Thinking about just 5 shots near the end of the sequence, from the line, "Happy Trails, Hans," to Hans falling out the window, the sequence utilizes a panning mid-close-up, the reverse shot of this, before not just 1 but 2 exterior shots of Hans holding onto Holly's Rolex before falling out the window. The sequence would have utilized multiple cameras, lenses, cranes, and sound stages for the exterior shots, endless lighting and fog trickery, and so much more. As such, a shot sequence keeping track of all this would have been absolutely essential.
Going back to digital creativity then, how could this meticulous level of planning help in game or web development?
An excellent source for this is Ars Technica's documentary series, War Stories, about difficulties in game development, particularly their episode on Crash Bandicoot. Perhaps ironically, while the game is fast, frenetic fun, its designers relied on meticulous planning to create the unique aesthetic of the game on the relatively primitive PlayStation. Each level was broken down into segments by the programmers that could be loaded piece by piece. By breaking levels down into segments, albeit digitally, the programmers were able to create larger levels than other studios at the time. While other programmers, such as those at Eidos, who made the original Tomb Raider, used traditional programming techniques, they achieved bland, washed-out results. The programmers at Naughty Dog's rigorous technical planning required breaking levels up into segments in order to get the most out of the console. In other words, breaking a game level down into unique segments, like the shot sequence of a good film, allowed the programmers to create something unique and enjoyable.
Okay, so a shot sequence isn't quite the same thing as a UML diagram, but I still think there are a lot of lessons for best practices that we can pick up from good filmmakers as digital creatives. Thinking about each shot of a film carefully and how we can communicate that to another person can help us to make prototypes that are easily understood and can be easily utilized by other creators. In conclusion then, these three techniques of mood boards, storyboards, and shot lists or shot sequences are probably not the first tools that a digital creative will reach for when planning out a piece of software. And that's fine. I don't necessarily think that they should be. Agile is popular for a reason. But I do think it's possible to get into a kind of a creative rut. And subsequently, looking to these different techniques, we can find inspiration for digital creativity by looking to other media. But what do you think? Do you think this is ridiculous? Is this a waste of time? Honestly, if you do, that's fine. I want to know. I think that looking to different media can give us inspiration, but maybe it's best that software developers stick to software developer tools, that filmmakers stick to making films. I don't know. You tell me. Leave a comment down below, like and subscribe to the channel, and you'll be able to more effectively barrage me with criticism, which I would welcome. And I'm also going to put a link to a Padlet connected with this week's video that you could get on and put your own comments, questions, and videos on as well. And I'll do my best to get in touch with you in time. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching the video, taking the time out of your day to watch this, and I hope you'll watch another one.